what's up. If you think about it, casseroles are kind of like anti-cooking. You use prepared ingredients to produce the highest volume of food that you can with the least amount of effort in dishes. And I get why that's attractive. Life can't always be about what's for dinner. But naturally, I'm out here wondering, what if casserole was good? Like very, very good. Today, I'm gonna show you exactly how to do just that. Two ways. One way significantly improves the most mom casserole of all time, and the other dunks on Hamburger Helper real hard. The first casserole is my upgraded version of tuna noodle. To make it, I'll start with a pot of at least 4 quarts of water and drop that on the stove. Once that's up to a ripping boil, I'll add in a fistful of salt, then 1 bag or about 350 grams of egg noodles. And when I say egg noodles, I'm specifically referring to this no yolks dumpling product. I like it because it's full of egg white protein, and that gives some structure to the pasta, which helps keep the noodles from getting mushy during the bake. Plus they're frilly, which helps hold the chunky stuff like tuna in place. Now, while those noodles boil, I'm gonna bust out my knife work. For that, I'll grab 1/2 of a large onion and give it a simple weeknight dice. That's 5 to 6 slices pole to pole, turn 90 degrees, then chop every 1/2 inch just like I am here. At the halfway point, I'll push the onion forward to maintain stability, then I'll keep on dicing. In total, I want 150 to 200 grams of diced onion. Next up is mushrooms. This isn't a standard issue ingredient in most mom tuna noodles, but for me, it's indispensable. To prep them, I'll just remove the stem, then slice the cap thinly about 1/4 inch wide. Don't go thicker because they'll end up being spongy and have kind of a cringy texture in the final dish. And once I've got 175 grams of sliced mushrooms, I'll check back on my noodles. Since these are gonna soften up more during the bake, I wanna cook these just a little bit under al dente. From here, I'm gonna move these noodles over to my sink to drain off the water, then I'll come back and drop them into my largest bowl. Once that's in, the pot goes back on the stove to cook the base of this casserole. Now I'll hit the noodles with a long ziggy of olive oil, I'll give them a quick toss, and I'll let these hang out while I cook the rest of this casserole. Ooh, look who's over here. It's my little sweetie, Ruby. Love you, Ruby. Back at the stove, I'll drop 145 grams of butter and give it a little melt ski. Then I'll drop in my diced onions, 15 grams of minced garlic, then a strong pinch of salt, and I'll jump in with my wooden spoon and stir to get this sweating. I want to cook this over about medium heat until the onion is starting to soften a little bit and the garlic is smelling fragrant. And once a good amount of the onion moisture has sweat off and the butter is sizzling, I'm going to drop in my sliced mushrooms, then a tiny bit more salt, then I'll stir to get them cooking alongside the onions. From here, I want to cook out most of the moisture in the mushrooms and soften them up. I know it's time to move on when they're just starting to take on some color and there isn't any more evaporation happening in the pan. And after about 4 minutes, these look like they're frying in the butter instead of simmering, so I know they're good. After mushrooms comes 75 grams of all-purpose flour. I'll stir that in until it's not lumpy. Then I'll cook it for about a minute until the raw edge is cooked off and the flour is unified with the fat. Then in goes 600 grams of chicken stock. I'll stir that in real quick so no lumps form as it comes up to a boil. Then 25 grams of Than Bouillon roasted chicken base and 10 grams of salt. Then I'll stir all the bouillon and salt into the mixture, bring it up to a simmer, then drop 15 grams of Dijon mustard, then 150 grams of heavy cream, then a big plop of cream cheese, which is exactly 100 grams. From here, I'm gonna stir everything to combine and melt in the cream cheese. I'll mention, the cream cheese is kind of the secret ingredient for this whole thing. It brings a little bit of cheesiness without making the casserole all about cheese. And once the cream cheese is melted in, the texture of this sauce should be velvety and smooth and look almost like fondue. Next, I'll move this pot over to my noodles and scrape the soup base, or whatever you want to call it, right on top. Then I'm going to add in 4 cans or 450 grams of nice tasting tuna fish. For me, nice tasting means Wild Planet brand skipjack tuna. I love it because it has a mild but substantial tuna flavor and it has a really great tuna texture. The downside is that it costs like $4 a can, which is very high. A cheaper backup option would be Starkist. That's closer to $2 a can and it's quite a bit better than the bargain bin stuff that tastes like cat food smells. If you do end up using the Wild Planet tuna, just make sure to crumble it down a little bit before adding it into the bowl because it's very chunky and if you don't, it'll be hard to distribute throughout the pasta. Next, I'll add in 200 grams of frozen peas, 100 grams of shredded medium sharp cheddar, then 50 grams of grated parmesan cheese, and finally, I'll drop in 20 cranks of black peppy. Now, I'm just gonna jump in and fold everything together until it's homogeneous. I'll mention that since the pasta is just a touch undercooked, it's gonna be thirsty and it's gonna soak up pretty much whatever moisture is around it. So you might need to add in a little little bit more water to keep things from being too dry. I've added about 30 to 40 grams here to keep things saucy. Next, I'll drop everything into a 9x13 casserole dish. Then I'll just press it down and spread it out. Then I'll drop on 4 to 5 big sprinkles of fried panko breadcrumbs. To make those, I just hit a 10-inch nonstick pan with a very generous amount of olive oil. Then I'll add in about 1 cup of panko breadcrumbs, stir to combine, and fry for about 3 to 4 minutes over medium-high heat, stirring frequently so that these things don't burn. Once these things are crisped up into a beautiful golden brown color, I'll move them over to a paper towel-lined plate to drain. Behind the panko, I'll sprinkle on 3 to 4 grips of grated Parmesan cheese. Then I'll move this whole thing over to a 425F oven to bake for 20 to 25 minutes. While that bakes, I want to thank Better Than Bouillon for sponsoring this video. You guys know that I'm a Better Than Bouillon guy from way back. I've been using it to add depth and flavor to my recipes pretty much since the beginning, whether or not they sponsor the video. It's actually super convenient that they are sponsoring this video because I would be using the Better Than Bouillon roasted chicken base as a flavor enhancer for this tuna noodle casserole no matter what. You'll notice that I'm also using chicken stock in this recipe, but since it's not homemade, it has very little flavor, so I need more. That's where the Better Than Bouillon comes in. It adds that deep roasted chicken flavor that I'm looking for without me having to use homemade stock. I use the chicken base in a ton of recipes, but my other go-to is the roasted beef base, which I'll be using in casserole number 2 later in this video. Better Than Bouillon also comes in a ton of other flavors though. There's veggie, roasted garlic, sauteed onion, ham, and lobster. This stuff is truly a weapon for the home cook, and you can find all of their major flavors in the soup aisle of most grocery stores. If you're looking for some of the other specialty flavors like lobster or chipotle base, you can get those over at betterthanbouillon.com. Use promo code Brian for free shipping when you purchase 2 or more jars. And after about 20-ish minutes of bake time, when I pull this out, you can see it's melty, bubbling, and just a little bit browned up on top. Now I'll just scoop a bunch into a bowl, making sure to serve up a decent amount of that crispy panko. Oh my, that's just an elite level casserole right there. Chicken soup soaked noodles with tuna. Now let's taste it. This dish is like getting a hug from your mom. It makes you feel warm, comforted, safe, and like everything in the world is gonna be totally okay. It's very creamy, it's very luxurious, but it's not heavy, and it's cheesy, but not too cheesy. The cream cheese is kind of like the secret weapon here. Plus you get a little bit of mushroom flavor that brings some earthiness, you get pops of sweetness from the peas, and then you get a lot of tuna, but this dish never gets fishy. Up next is a blend of cheeseburger casserole and beef stroganoff. To make it, I'll start with 4 to 5 quarts of water on the stove, and once it's boiling, I'll add in a strong grip of salt, then 340 grams or 12 ounces of large macaroni. I like large elbows for this dish because they integrate with the ground beef perfectly, and they're an homage to cheeseburger mac, which is on the Mount Rushmore of classic casseroles. Again, I want to boil these noodles until they're just about al dente. If you cook them too much, the casserole is going to be mushy. So after 6 minutes, I'm going to move this pot over to the sink, drain off the pasta, then I'll drop the mac into my largest bowl, then drop the Dutch oven back on the stove so I can cook the sauce. Just like I did for the dumpling noodles, I'll hit this mac with a few ziggies of olive oil, then give it a toss, and let this pasta cool down. Over at the stove, into a medium-high heat Dutch oven, I'll drop 1 pound of 90-10 ground beef. Then I'll hit that with a pinch of salt, grab my ground beef mushing tool, then get to work browning and crumbling down this beef. Texture-wise, I prefer this to be very, very well broken down. I think that makes the best sauce and the best eating experience. When you don't smash the beef as it browns, you get large nuggets of meat that are tough and gristly, and they sit in the dish like dry meatballs. It's not good. So I go hard and smush this meat for basically the entire first 5 to 6 minutes of browning until I get a result that looks like this. Super crumbly and chunks that are no bigger than a grain of rice. Next in goes 125 grams of diced onion, 20 grams of minced garlic, and another small pinch of salt. I'll jump back in with my wooden spoon and stir to get everything combined and to scrape up the browned beef stuff that might have stuck to the bottom during the browning phase. About 5 minutes later, the onions are softened and translucent and the kitchen smells like sweet roasty garlic. So next in goes 450 grams or about 1 pound of sliced baby bella mushrooms and a small pinch of salt. By the way, I cut these mushrooms to the same thickness as I did for the tuna noodle casserole, which is somewhere in the ballpark of 1/4 inch. Now I'll just stir in the raw mushrooms and sweat these down for about 5 to 8 minutes, depending on how large your pot is. About 3 to 4 minutes later, the bottom of this pot is all glazed up with mushroom and onion stuff, and that can burn eventually. So the move here is to add in some water and loosen it up with your wooden spoon to deglaze deglaze it. I'll scrape that for another minute or so, then I'll keep on cooking for about 4 to 5. And after a couple more minutes of sweating and stirring, the mushrooms are cooked down and just starting to brown, and the onions have fully melted. Next in goes a 25-gram dollop of tomato paste, then 50 grams of all-purpose flour. From here, I'll stir that to get any lumps worked out and to get something that's kind of roux adjacent. This is going to do the thickening for the creamy beef sauce. Once that's stirred in, I'm going to add in 300 grams of beef stock, 40 grams of warch, 50 grams of Than Bouillon roasted beef base, 30 grams of Dijon goes in, then I'll add in 225 grams of heavy cream. Next, I'll stir that in and bring it up to a simmer and cook for about 2 minutes to let things unify. Lastly, I'll add in 75 grams of sour cream, then stir that in off heat. If you boil sour cream, it can curdle, almost like ricotta cheese, and make the sauce a little bit grainy. Once stirred in, the final sauce should look like mushroomy beef gravy, but a little bit looser. From here, I'm gonna move this sauce over to my noodle bowl, then scrape it out gracefully right over the handle. Good job. Then in goes 200 grams of shredded mozzarella cheese and 50 grams of grated parm. Now the spatula goes in and I'll stir this until the noodles and sauce are one happy family. Again, don't hesitate to add in a little splash of water if things are starting to look pasty in the bowl. We want the texture to be stirrable and saucy. And that looks good. Next, I'll carefully plop this. Oh, got that all over the side. Whoopsie. Okay, once that's tucked back in, I'll top with some crispy fried onions. Yes, I'm using the store-bought onions that your mom puts on top of green bean casserole because they're very good. If you wanted to see if you could do your own fried onions, check out my recipe for those in my green bean casserole video, linked in description. Now to prep these, I'm gonna run my knife through them 3 to 4 times to crumble them into smaller pieces. This allows them to integrate with the casserole much better than the larger pieces that come out of the bag, and you get more crunchies in every bite. The last touch is a couple of grips of grated parm dusted right on top. Then I'm gonna drop this thing into a 425F oven and bake it until melty and bubbly. 25 minutes later, when I pull this thing out, you can see the onions caught a little bit of additional browning and the noodles have soaked up the creamy mushroom beef sauce. To serve, I'll pile it high into a bowl, making sure to get plenty of onion crispies in the mix. Then I'll give it a taste. When you get beef, mushrooms, fried onions, and 2 types of cheeses baked together, it becomes more than the sum of its parts. It's kind of like a super flavor. If you guys like this video, you're really gonna love the one linked on the screen right here. The YouTube algorithm picked it specifically for you, and it's never wrong.